Well, Friday morning, HPA. Finally, the riffraff have gone. We're down to the hand-picked elite. Now, those of you who last year on Friday morning didn't have a home to go to, who were part of the hand-picked elite, might recall that I shared some work I was doing on why I thought we tend to get trends wrong in our business. And what I did was to kind of calibrate the tech trends we get expressed around consumer tech at CES, the ones around professional media tech at NAB, the kind of general industry buzz that goes on in a year, the kind of stuff that causes larger entities to start innovation hubs and increase their beanbag budget, and then the consumer trend, those pesky old people who just do what they do. And I tracked that over a number of years and revealed a couple of quite interesting things. It confirmed that as an industry, we do indeed tend to chase the latest hype, particularly if it's got anything at all to do with the way that AV content is presented, and especially if it involves putting something on your head. But the consumers, meanwhile, were rather more consistent. What they seemed to be saying to us year in, year out was, we love video. That stuff you make, guys, we love it. Did we tell you we really love video? And overall, what it brought home to me was that as an industry, as a professional media industry, we really aren't in control of our future. So then I thought, what happens if we don't look backwards, we actually look forwards, and we consider what we know about global markets, about tech trends, about consumer behaviors, and so on. I think about what could be coming down the track. Could there be anything coming our way that might perhaps, because of our fixations, catch us out? I'm sure there are lots, and I'm sure I haven't thought of them, but here are a few that struck me. The first, we could be blindsided by voice search, or more particularly, by the search for content using voice. Now, something kind of incredible happened at CES this year that marked for me a really seismic change in the media industry, and yet CES barely noticed it, and indeed, it wasn't even really mentioned in our CES report here at HPA this week. And it was this, that suddenly pretty nearly every display at CES had full, intelligent, contextual voice search integrated into it. Very often, Google Assistant. Now, we've had bits of voice around displays and around particular services for a couple of years. But what we were seeing at CES was a move to a place where I think very soon consumers will start to expect to search for their content using voice. Some of the reason I'm so confident about that is actually the speed of take-up of voice assistants, particularly in Western markets, and the fact that actually when people get one, they tend to get more than one, which tells me that in fact they're starting to become quite comfortable with the idea of voice as a kind of management device in their life. I saw some data this week that suggests that by 2023, there will be 8 billion voice assistant devices active in the world. That includes smartphones, but the category of device where the growth is predicted to be greatest, you guessed it, it's in displays. Why does it matter? It matters because people will start to search for content by name, by actor, by mood, by genre, by place. They don't need to know who made it. And so, although we've had broadcasters worrying about attribution for several years now in the over-the-top world, we get to a place where, in fact, every single content creator, never mind how funky or new they are, can start to get worried about attribution. It also indicates to me that content creators will gain more and more power, particularly the really good ones, and they will start to demand more and more share of revenue. it seems reasonable to think that at some point we're going to have a major intervention, not from a media player, but from either a technology play or a new business model play that will find a way of shortening the distance between the content creator and the consumer to its minimum, facilitated by the use of voice. Have we ever seen such a thing? Well, we know what happened to the music industry. Okay, next up. Well, I'm going to call it alt-digital. I don't know if I just invented a new term or not. And what I mean is that extraordinary kind of mosaic of digital activity, usually involving media, which is outside the kind of mainstream filmed entertainment and TV that we're also comfortable with. Because of the growth of video on demand, I think we sometimes forget that actually even in recent years, if you look at digital media revenue, VOD actually only ever accounts for around about a third now. And although it's been growing really strongly in recent years, it's due to flatten out. So it's not set actually to erode that proportion. Really strong in there, of course, and perhaps the biggest segment of alt-digital is gaming. Now, Netflix very smartly observed recently that they regard their biggest competitor not actually, this is the Disneys of this world, but in fact, the gaming industry. And they're saying that because, I'm sure, of the huge revenue that it attracts, but also because of the huge amount of time that it attracts. I think because we've all been so struck by kind of multitasking around screens that now takes place, we do forget that actually consumers do have limited, finite budgets of money, of time, and of attention. And I was very struck when I saw this table, which shows kind of how other devices have lost out when consumers have begun to make a lot of use of voice assistants. I think overall with kind of alt-digital, the reason why we find it so hard to get to grips with is because it doesn't have common metrics. You know, there aren't schedules around it. It's quite hard to kind of measure. It's rather kind of ethereal. And a great example of that is what get called stories. I'm sure you all know they're these kind of 1 minute long video streams that people create on social media networks. I mean, it's really a very, very high amount of both creation and consumption of those video streams going on. Marketeers are across it, but the rest of us really aren't. The mistake we mustn't make is we mustn't say, this is because millennials are just kids who are going to grow up and it's all going to be all right. I can assure you, millennials that are typically categorized as being up to the age of either 34 or up to 38 are really not children. They're not about to grow out of it. And that means that when we see the TV consumption habits of millennials, we have to believe that is only heading in one direction. Why does it all matter? It matters, I think, because you can't overstate the extent to which the TV industry and the suppliers around it have really been the core of media for decades. What we're beginning to see is a polarization between premium content, movies, premium episodics and documentaries and sport, and then all this alt-digital activity. And I strongly suspect the thing that's going to have to drop out because time and money are finite is going to be TV. And I don't think we've quite appreciated yet what the disappearance of the historic core of our industry could really mean. Next up, out of home. Do you see what they did there? So out of home at heart is all about the Internet of Things, and the Internet of Things has been hyped for about 5 years now, particularly around the smart home. The problem with the smart home is it takes marginal human problems and tries to solve them by imposing on the consumer a disproportionate technology overhead. So it's not surprising it's advanced very slowly. And if you look at the external environment, you could say, well, that's even worse. I mean, cities are really messy places, the countryside's really disconnected, and both of them are covered in local and national regulation. But there are public environments which are populous and much, much easier to control. And I'm talking about shopping malls, I'm talking about amusement parks, I'm talking about resorts, I'm talking about airports and transport hubs, I'm talking about the workplace and even factories. And what the technology companies have begun to realize is that these populous environments, which have clear purpose, a well-defined set of activities, but are very popular, are good places in which to explore technologies such as robotics, automation, AI. And actually, that in fact, this kind of technology can become part of the kind of attraction of these particular spaces. So, for instance, whereas we tend to have a view of automated cars as being about kind of the family saloon bombing up the freeway without a driver at the wheel, actually most of us, I suspect, will first experience autonomous vehicles in these kinds of public space shuttles, probably in a resort, something like this. The other reason, of course, they're also excited about this potential is because it's coinciding with the arrival of 5G, which will potentially enable a lot of it, but also will enable people to bring more media into this space. And as Andy Quested brilliantly demonstrated on Wednesday, the potential for the public realm to be full of screens and media is now becoming very well understood. So this, for instance, is not an aquarium. This is the inside of an autonomous public vehicle. Again, why does it matter? I think it matters because I think we'll find that infrastructure providers, investors, tech companies, marketeers will get infatuated by the out-of-home environment in the next few years, and that attention and investment will further contend the amount of money that's available to spend in what we think of as being mainstream media. Next up, well, you've got to talk about China, haven't you? And particularly these guys. The company with the highest income from gaming in the world, Tencent. Their revenues, which are equivalent to those in gaming of Sony and Microsoft combined. Baidu, whose advertising revenue is currently growing at roughly twice the rate of Google's. Alibaba, truly the Amazon of China, dominating the retail market. And it's them, actually, who are going to provide the voice for BMW cars and their voice control in that domain. Now, all those things I've been talking about around out-of-home and old digital are kind of writ large when it comes to China, and indeed to Eastern markets more broadly. And that's going to be accelerated by the projected take-up of 5G in those territories. Now, you could look at the stats and say, you know what? There's nothing to worry about because when it comes to digital media, actually the US digital media market is still much bigger than the Chinese one. And perhaps even more importantly, if you look at the average revenue per user, it's running at more than 20 times what you get in China. Well, that's fine if you look at our familiar world. But now look at that kind of alt digital world. And what we see there is that the gaming market in China is bigger than the US, and the ARPU is, if not equivalent, at least starting to get into the same kind of ballpark. Look at mobile. The Chinese market is absolutely vast, and there's far more potential for expansion than in the US, not to mention that take-up of 5G. But most of all, you've got to be compelled by this. e-payments. Alibaba's Alipay and Tencent's WeChat Pay each handle more payments in a single month than PayPal's $451 billion a year. That's an incredible amount of money, but actually, you know what? Even more than that, it's an incredible amount of data. We truly know what everyone is doing kind of all the time in that country. We might find it creepy, but if you're a tech company and you want to explore the potential of AI and video analytics and so forth, China becomes a really great place to be. And that's why companies like UbTech here are the startups attracting the greatest investment when it comes to AI. Again, why does it matter? I think what we could see in the next few years is a technology gap opening up between East and West, where actually the Chinese become the innovators rather than the copyists. When it has that kind of energy and innovation behind it, I think that will have a cultural impact. I think we'll start to see more and more kind of cultural mashups, particularly around youth content, between East and West. And I think we'll start to hear more and more stories like the one about TikTok, which you may know is the app that has got incredible take-up at the moment amongst young people in the West. But TikTok is a social media app that's made in China. So if the HPA Tech Retreat in 5 years' time is still solely devoted to the Western media market, I think it would start to look extremely parochial. OK, those are the big scary things. There's, of course, one more kicker, the one we kind of all know about. It's absolutely no surprise, and that's the potential to be blindsided by one of the global tech giants. Maybe one of these 8 lovelies, or perhaps a new one that will suddenly emerge in the next 5 years. I mean, who knows what the impact will be when Apple starts to get serious in the media market in the next few months. The stat that actually blew my mind this year was this one, that Apple has enough cash in its offshore reserves to buy the franchise of every single team in every one of the top 5 sports leagues in the USA and have $50 billion change. So much for sports rights. So, look at all this. Should we be scared? I think we can still be pretty excited, because one thing I'm certain about is that storytelling will remain the most valued and most popular human endeavor of all. Premium content is still going to be gold in any of these markets. It's just that when we think about what we're all doing in a few years' time, we might still have jobs. We could just be working for somebody quite surprising. Thank you very much.
Any quick question for Mark?
There's only 60 seconds, folks. Do you see how I did that to kind of reduce the potential for? It is scary. It is exciting. We're going to see some really extraordinary new forms of content and new environments for content, I suspect. And the total amount of content made is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
What should HPA do next year to address this?
Well, that's a great question. I really think we should consider having a kind of Eastern media track and start to take seriously what's happening in non-Western markets. We'll see a lot of very, very, very different kinds of behaviors around the consumption of video.
OK, thanks very much, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
And